What is the price of prejudice? For Horizon Atlantic Airlines, that number was $4 billion and the entire honor of an empire. The Boeing 787 flight. Horizon Atlantic 227 was preparing to take off from Los Angeles to London. In the first-class cabin, the air felt stretched thin by a silence full of power, the kind of silence that belongs to people who believe they deserve everything around them. Among the tailored suits and gleaming silver watches sat a black woman in a simple grey business suit, plain flat shoes with no logo, and a thick book on quantum mechanics open in her hands. She was seated in seat 2, a quiet resting her head lightly against the window. No one in that cabin knew they were sitting beside Dr. Maya Cole, the woman who had just signed off on a $4 billion disbursement to rescue the very airline they were flying. But sometimes, one wrong look is all it takes for an entire world to collapse. That morning at LAX, the sky was so blue it looked as if it could wash away every worry. Inside the Orion lounge of the international terminal, faint jazz music drifted through the air, mixing with the scent of strong coffee and the rustle of newspapers. Maya sat alone in a quiet corner, leaning back against a dark brown leather chair. After 7 straight days of meetings in New York, all she wanted was a few hours of silence. No calls, no contracts, no eyes watching her with fear or admiration. She loved this feeling, being invisible in a world that never stopped looking. Not Dr. Cole, the tech billionaire, but just a woman preparing to return to London, where the future of tens of thousands of people waited for her decision. Her black hair was neatly tied back, her eyes calm yet razor sharp. At 41, Maya carried a different kind of power, the kind that didn't need to shout to command silence, just one look. Her company, Cole Dynamics, was not built on noise, but on vision, a vision of a world where technology and humanity could walk side by side. Under her leadership, an AI logistics empire had risen to span the globe, becoming the symbol of what she called progress with purpose. Today, she was about to complete the biggest deal of her career, a $4 billion lifeline into Horizon Atlantic Airlines, a carrier drowning in debt and scandals. A deal that could save 50,000 jobs a rebirth for an entire industry. And it all began with one 10-hour flight. Her phone vibrated softly. Daniel Brooks, Chief Financial Officer of Cole Dynamics, appeared on the screen. His voice was warm, tinged with excitement. "Everything's ready, Maya. The credit line is open. The system's just waiting for your signal once you land in London." He laughed lightly. Thomas Keaton, the CEO of Horizon, is practically dancing in his office. He's already sent 3 gift baskets to our headquarters. Maya smiled faintly. "Let's not count the chickens before they hatch, Daniel. A deal is only truly done when the money's in the account." "Fair point," he said. "But this one's a sure thing. You're about to save an entire airline." "No," Maya replied softly, her eyes drifting toward the window where a plane gleamed under the sunlight. "I'm not saving them. I'm buying them a chance to change." An hour later, she stood at gate 18A. People crowded the priority boarding lane, everyone acting busier than the world itself. A middle-aged woman in a shiny pink tracksuit, her neck weighed down by gold jewelry, was complaining into her phone. "The champagne in their lounge tastes like vinegar. For the price we pay, I expect better." Maya smiled quietly. She didn't judge. She was used to people who believed money could buy dignity. When her turn came, she handed her ticket to the gate agent, Mark Ellis, a weary-looking man near the end of a long shift. He scanned the code, nodded, and waved her through. No glance, no recognition. A small, comforting invisibility, or so she thought. Inside the first-class cabin, the lights were dim, the seats wrapped in smooth cream leather, and the air carried a faint scent of essential oils. Maya stowed her leather bag in the overhead bin, took her seat, and opened her book. Across from her, a man was talking loudly on the phone about stocks. The young woman in the row ahead kept taking selfies, the camera flash reflecting off her glass of wine. Maya inhaled deeply. This was her favorite part of business travel, the quiet between movements, a stillness between two corporate storms. She had no idea that in just 20 minutes, everything would explode. One privileged passenger would look at her, and in that look, $4 billion would slip from Horizon Atlantic's hands. Over the cabin, speakers came the familiar announcement, "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Flight Horizon Atlantic 227 will be departing shortly." Maya closed her eyes. A fleeting sense of peace slipped into her heart, a calm pause between two drumbeats. She didn't know that outside the window, the universe had already prepared a merciless test for patience, for pride, and for the true meaning of respect. Beyond the glass, sunlight flashed across the airplane's wing like the edge of a blade. Maya Cole sat still, her hands resting on the open book. She hadn't turned to the next page. In the skies, thousands of planes take off every day. But on this day, only one carried a story the world would remember for years, the story of a woman underestimated for her appearance, and of a system that paid for it with its very life. The flight had not yet left the ground, but destiny had already taken off. Morning sunlight poured over Los Angeles, sliding across the glass walls of skyscrapers, as if the city were forged from metal and dreams. Among thousands rushing through the streets, one woman walked slowly, not because she had time to spare, but because she had learned how to control her breath, even in moments that could change everything. Dr. Maya Cole, 41 years old, the woman Wall Street called by 3 words, the silent architect, the one who rebuilt an entire industry using silence as her blueprint. From childhood, Maya lived in contradiction, a black girl in a Chicago suburb, where people believed that dreams too big only led to disappointment. Her father was an aircraft engineer, her mother a physics teacher. But both were killed in a plane crash when Maya was 16, a moment that shaped the rest of her life. From that day on, she made herself a promise. One day she would make aviation safer, fairer, and more humane. 25 years later, that promise had carried her to the summit of power. At the 57th floor of her San Francisco headquarters, Cole Dynamics ran like a kingdom of perfect order. There were no raised voices, no displays of ego, only intelligence, dedication, and a philosophy carved into the wall. We don't trade the future for profit. We invest in the future to make it worth living. Her company held algorithms capable of predicting fuel demand, optimizing logistics chains, and saving the global economy tens of billions of dollars every year. And now that very technology was about to be used to resurrect a dying empire, Horizon Atlantic Airlines. Horizon Atlantic had once been a symbol of greatness, an airline from the 1980s, synonymous with luxury and the dream of flying with America. But after years of mismanagement, media scandals, and pilot strikes, it was collapsing under the weight of its own past. Billions in debt, plummeting stock, and 50,000 employees living in fear of losing their jobs. Just when every door seemed to close, one name appeared: Cole Dynamics, a tech conglomerate ready to inject $4 billion to rebuild the entire system in exchange for exclusive integration of its AI technology across every flight operation. It wasn't just a contract, it was a final act of resurrection. For the past 3 months, Maya had worked day and night with her advisory team to finalize the deal. She didn't just study financial reports, she studied the people behind them. She read hundreds of letters from Horizon employees, complaints, forgotten ideas, unfinished dreams. One engineer had written, "I still love the sky, but I'm not sure my company loves us anymore." Maya printed that letter and placed it on her desk as a compass for the mission ahead. She wasn't saving Horizon for profit. She was saving them for the faith they had lost. This morning, while Horizon's executive board gathered in London, preparing for the press conference, Maya had only one simple task to fly there, appear at the signing ceremony, and activate the capital transfer. She wanted to be there in person because, as she once told Daniel Brooks, "I never invest in a company until I've looked its CEO straight in the eye. I need to know whether they're leading the business or just leading their own ego." In the quiet of the Orion lounge, Maya reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph. Her father, in his engineer's uniform, stood proudly beside an airplane in 1985. She brushed her fingers gently across the image and whispered, "I'm about to do what you always dreamed of." Then she put the photo away and opened her laptop. On the screen was an email from Thomas Keaton, CEO of Horizon Atlantic. "We are honored to welcome you, Dr. Cole. This partnership will change everything." Maya smiled faintly. She knew everything would indeed change, but no one could imagine how. She checked her watch. It was 10:45 in the morning. Flight HA 227 to London would depart at 11:30. She stood, adjusted her collar, and looked into the mirror. The reflection showed an ordinary woman, yet behind that image was a mind powerful enough to shake global markets with a single transaction. She picked up her leather bag and left the lounge. A young female attendant bowed slightly, her eyes full of respect. "Have a pleasant flight, Dr. Cole." Maya offered a thin smile. "Thank you, but I doubt there will be much pleasantness in the skies today." The long hallway leading to the gate stretched out like a tunnel through time. Each of Maya's footsteps echoed softly, steady and deliberate. In her mind, the faces of Horizon's 50,000 employees appeared: engineers, pilots, flight attendants, ground staff. She imagined their expressions when they heard the news that the company had been saved, the light returning to their eyes. Every person, every life rested on her decision. $4 billion, one signature, and one promise. At the boarding gate, the line began to move. A weary-looking man named Mark Ellis scanned tickets. Maya handed him her boarding pass. He nodded without a word. Perhaps that small, indifferent gesture was the first sign of what was coming, a chain of actions born from thoughtless prejudice, powerful enough to set an empire on fire. As she stepped into the jet bridge, Maya inhaled deeply. The familiar scent of metal jet fuel and cold air conditioning filled her lungs. She had always said, "That's the smell of evolution." But today, something in the air made her uneasy. She didn't know that within minutes, in this very first-class cabin, a woman would call her sweetheart, a flight attendant would treat her as a problem to solve, and an entire airline would lose its future simply because it failed to recognize who was sitting in seat 2A. Outside the window, sunlight blazed off the airplane's wings. Maya Cole had no idea that a single condescending glance, a careless word could erase every effort, every act of goodwill, every promise of a $4 billion rebirth in the span of one afternoon. But that was still 30 minutes away. For now, she still believed in the good in people. She still believed that when given a chance, people would know how to cherish it. She did not yet know that sometimes prejudice kills miracles before they ever have a chance to begin. The announcement echoed through the terminal, Horizon Atlantic 227 to London is now boarding. The first-class passengers began to line up, dark suits, gleaming Swiss watches, polished leather shoes, each wearing the expression of someone who believed the world revolved around them. And among them was Maya Cole, dressed in a simple grey suit, flat shoes, and a calm gaze. No one knew she was the woman holding $4 billion, the only lifeline that could save the airline they were about to board. The jet bridge was a long silver tunnel, cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the steel walls, stretching the passengers' shadows like invisible strings. Maya inhaled deeply. The familiar scent of the airport metal jet fuel recycled air made her smile faintly. The smell of motion she once told Daniel, and of opportunities waiting to take off. As she stepped into the first-class cabin, she could feel the shift in atmosphere. Everything here was designed to separate hand-stitched cream leather seats, polished wooden panels, soft golden lights that made anyone sitting there feel just a little more important than the rest of the world. A floating bubble of luxury where people believed money could buy respect. Maya found her seat 2A by the window. She placed her leather bag in the overhead compartment, carefully adjusted the thick book in her hand, Quantum Principles of Modern Systems, and sat down. The seat was soft, carrying the faint scent of new leather. Around her, other passengers were settling in. Across the aisle, a businessman barked into his phone. "No, sell all those shares, I don't care. I'm not flying 10 hours just to lose money." In front of her, a young couple giggled, raising their glasses of wine for a selfie. To London, baby Maya ignored them. She opened her book and returned to the page she had been reading, her eyes moving steadily across the lines. She loved this feeling, disappearing from the world of power, becoming just another person among those who thought they were extraordinary. Then a woman's voice cut through the calm, sharp, high-pitched, edged with irritation. "Oh my God, these overhead bins are so small. How do they expect me to fit my luggage in here?" The voice was followed by a strong wave of perfume and the jingling of gold necklaces clinking together. Linda Crawford, the woman in the pink metallic tracksuit from the lounge, was struggling with her oversized rhinestone-covered suitcase. She tried to shove it into the bin above seat 2B, then turned toward 2A, where Maya sat. Linda's eyes swept over Maya like an X-ray, scanning, judging, and concluding in less than a second. A plain grey suit, flat shoes, neatly braided hair, no diamond ring, no Chanel bag. Linda froze for a moment. Her expression shifted from surprise to annoyance, and finally into polite disdain, masked as a smile. "Excuse me," Linda said, her voice high and saccharine. "I think you're sitting in the wrong seat." Maya looked up gently, marking her page with a finger. "I'm sorry," she asked calmly. "This seat," Linda raised her ticket, pointing to the printed number 2, Bert. "The seat beside her is my husband's, and this row is ours. I believe there's been some mistake. Would you mind checking your ticket again?" Maya glanced at the row, then at the boarding pass on her phone. 2A. "There's no mistake," she said, with a quiet smile. "This is my seat." Linda chuckled softly, lowering her voice as if speaking to a lost child. "Sweetheart, I think you're in the wrong place. First class is here, economy is back there." The words carried just loud enough for others to hear. Heads began to turn. The air in the cabin changed. Maya remained composed, her voice steady and measured. "I know exactly where I am, Mom, and my seat is 2A. Linda blinked, visibly shocked. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she thought didn't belong in her world. She scoffed lightly, then turned and called out loudly to her husband, who was just approaching. "Greg, you got here just in time. This lady's sitting in our row." Greg Crawford looked calmer, but the flicker in his eyes carried the same disdain. "I think there's a mix-up," he said. 2A is mine." Maya closed her book, picked up her phone, and showed her boarding pass. The name was clear, Maya Cole, seat 2A. But Linda didn't even look. She crossed her arms, tilted her head, and said in that same sugary tone, "Must be a system error. They rarely double-check tickets bought with reward points." The words hit like a blade. No one spoke, but everyone understood. A black woman, dressed simply sitting in first class, must have been luck or an upgrade. Maya felt her chest tighten, a cold weight spreading under her skin. She had seen this before. In restaurants, when the waiter handed the check to the man beside her. At conferences when people called her assistant, even though she was the keynote speaker. And every time she chose silence, not out of weakness, but to preserve her dignity. She smiled faintly and said softly, "I'm sure the flight attendant can help you confirm." Linda immediately raised her hand, gesturing as though summoning a servant. "Excuse me, flight attendant." A young man approached, his hair slicked back, smile tense, name tag gleaming, Tyler Barnes. "Yes, Mom, someone's sitting in my husband's seat," Linda declared dramatically. "I tried to explain, but she refuses to move. She won't show her ticket, and she's being rather uncooperative." Tyler's eyes flicked between the two women. On one side, Linda White's well-dressed voice, trembling with feigned distress. On the other, Maya Brown skin, calm eyes, composed but firm. For a moment, Tyler seemed unsure whom to believe, but habit, that quiet reflex of bias, pulled him in one direction. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, polite but commanding, "may I see your boarding pass, please?" Maya held up her phone. The ticket was clear, seat 2A. He glanced at it, blinked, then nodded slowly. But instead of apologizing, he said, "There must be a minor system error. I'll double-check with the office. Please stay seated and don't escalate the situation." Maya drew in a breath. She knew his kind people who would rather be wrong than admit they were biased. She turned her gaze to the window, sunlight glinting across her face, her eyes sharpening like steel. "Very well," she said quietly. "I'll wait." Linda turned away, a smug smile on her lips. Greg unfolded his newspaper satisfied. Tyler walked briskly back toward the galley, unaware that this small choice to trust the illusion instead of the truth had just triggered a domino effect that would bring an entire airline to its knees. Maya reopened her book, but she didn't read. The pages trembled softly with her breath. She wasn't angry. She was sad. Sad that even in first class, where status was supposed to erase blindness, ignorance still ruled, just hidden behind a polished mask. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the engines begin to hum outside. She didn't know that minutes later, those engines would be drowned out by shouting accusations, and finally the sound of the cabin door unlocking as security stepped in. A storm was forming. Born from a seat, from a glance, from a prejudice so small it seemed insignificant, yet powerful enough to destroy a $4 billion empire. Every great tragedy begins with something small, a wrong look, a sentence soaked in arrogance, and this time it started from seat 2B on Flight Horizon Atlantic 227. Linda Crawford adjusted her gold necklaces, smoothed the carefully dyed curls of her blonde hair, then glanced at the woman sitting beside her, Maya Cole. That woman didn't return the look. She did not bow her head, did not apologize, did not show the slightest embarrassment, the way Linda was used to seeing from people who were in the wrong seat. Maya's composure made Linda uneasy. In her mind, there was only one possible explanation: arrogance. Linda hated women like that, the kind who did not need many words, yet still made her feel small. "Sweetheart," she said again, her smile thin as a blade, "I will give you another chance. If you leave now, I will tell the flight attendants not to make a scene." Maya lifted her head slightly. Her voice was so calm it was almost dangerous. "Thank you. But I think we should let the crew confirm. The truth does not need to be rushed." The smile vanished from Linda's lips. A man had just arrived, Greg Crawford, her husband, tall in a black suit with a silver watch. "What is going on?" he asked in a lazy tone. "What is going on?" Linda scoffed. "What is going on is that someone is taking your seat, and she does not seem interested in moving." Greg sighed, turned to Maya, and spoke in a voice that tried to sound polite, but was completely hollow. "I am sorry, you must be mistaken. That seat is mine." Maya looked him straight in the eyes, not flinching. "There is no mistake. My ticket says 2A. Greg frowned and held out his own ticket. With just a glance, Maya saw the same number 2A. She understood at once: a duplicated seat, a common system error. A small issue. A simple check would easily fix it. But to Linda, it was not about a seat. It was a battle over status. Honey, Linda said, making sure the entire cabin could hear, "I told you sometimes they let people in on reward points, or they mix up the cabin classes. I do not blame her. It is just so unfortunate." The words were sweet as honey, yet the word unfortunate dripped out with poison. A man in the row ahead glanced back. A woman in the row behind looked over. No one said anything, but their eyes were enough to define Maya, someone who did not belong here. Maya felt a coldness spread through her chest. Not from shame, but from familiarity. She had walked into hundreds of rooms where people looked at her like this, not attacking her, simply refusing to believe she deserved to be there. Tyler Barnes returned with a clipboard in his hand. "I apologize for the delay," he said, forcing a professional tone. "There is a minor system issue. 2 passengers have been assigned. Seat 2A. Linda jumped in immediately. "You see, I told you. Of course the mistake is on her side." Tyler turned to Maya. "Miss Cole, to avoid delaying the flight, the airline is prepared to offer you a move to premium economy. We will provide a voucher, complimentary drinks, and appropriate compensation." It sounded like a polite offer, but his voice carried an order. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Have you checked Mr. Crawford's ticket?" Tyler hesitated for a moment. "I do not think that is necessary. The gentleman booked his first-class ticket months ago." "So did I," Maya replied, her voice sharp but still smooth as velvet. "You may call your supervisor. I will remain in my assigned seat until someone reads the manifest." The first-class cabin fell into sudden silence. The air grew heavy, like the sky before a storm. Linda looked around and noticed a few people beginning to whisper. She felt control slipping away. She instantly switched tactics, the kind of tactic people like Linda always used when logic stopped working performance. "Tyler," she said, her voice trembling as she placed a hand on her chest. "I really do not feel comfortable sitting next to someone like her. She is very aggressive. I feel unsafe." Each word dropped slowly, carefully crafted. Maya could hardly believe her ears. She was sitting still, both hands resting on her thighs, while the other woman pretended to be frightened. "I am sorry," Maya asked, her voice dropping lower. "Are you saying I am threatening you right now?" Linda widened her eyes, fake tears ready to fall. "You see," she said, "she is raising her voice at me. I do not feel safe." Tyler immediately stepped between them, his tone stiff. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to lower your voice and cooperate." Maya's emotions shifted from disbelief to a cold clarity. Once again, she saw how seemingly harmless words could activate an entire power structure where prejudice hid behind the mask of safety rules. She answered each word crisp and clear. "I am not causing trouble. I am not insulting anyone. I am sitting in my assigned seat with a valid ticket, and I am asking to be treated fairly." Tyler did not meet her eyes. He only said, "If you refuse to move, I will have to call security." Linda leaned back in her seat, letting the fake tears spill at just the right moment, her voice wobbling like a plucked string. "Tyler, please, I cannot sit next to her. I am terrified." Her words were like a flare shot up into the cabin ceiling. The whole section filled with murmurs. "What is happening? Is there a disruptive passenger? This is awful, even in first class." Those whispers, those doubtful glances were the fuel for the fire. Linda Crawford had carelessly or deliberately lit a fire that would burn down a $4 billion empire she did not even know existed. Maya felt blood pounding in her temples. She did not shout, did not lash out. Only her eyes changed, and that was enough to make Tyler step back half a pace. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. "You are going to call security to drag a quiet passenger off this plane just because another woman says she feels afraid?" Tyler swallowed hard. One brief second of hesitation, but Linda quickly cut in her voice, rising. "Yes, I feel threatened. I did not pay thousands of dollars to be treated like this." That sentence, loud enough, polished enough to sound like the words of an important customer, sealed Tyler's decision. He picked up the phone and pressed the button. "This is lead flight attendant Barnes in first class. I have a non-compliant passenger, requesting security assistance at gate 22. Maya closed her eyes. In her mind, all she could hear was the engines outside their rumble building, like the heartbeat of a giant beast about to plunge off a cliff. She thought of Daniel of Thomas Keaton in London, of the $4 billion waiting for her signal. And then she realized it was not this aircraft that was in free fall. It was prejudice itself. Tyler set the phone down and turned back with a look of triumph. "Ma'am," he said, "please gather your belongings. Security is on the way." Maya rose to her feet, her gaze perfectly calm. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice light as air. "And it is a mistake you will remember for the rest of your life." Linda scoffed. "Oh, please. She is just trying to scare us." What Linda did not know was that the woman she had just insulted was not just any passenger. She was the person whose company was keeping her airline, Tyler's Airline, and the livelihoods of tens of thousands of Horizon Atlantic employees alive on the strength of her decision. With a single tap on her phone, Maya Cole could erase all the money they were counting on to save their future. And in just a few minutes, that is exactly what would happen. As the sound of security's footsteps echoed down the aisle, Linda took out a compact mirror and touched up her lipstick. She felt victorious. She had no idea that each approaching step carried not only humiliation for one woman, but also a death sentence for an entire airline. The cabin door was still open, and the air felt so thick it was as if a storm was about to break. It had all started with a small misunderstanding, But now it was turning into a stage for power, a place where the one holding the microphone was always right, and the one who stayed silent was always wrong. At the center of that stage stood Tyler Barnes, his face tight in his dark blue uniform. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, the very right decision he believed he was making would bury his entire career and an entire airline along with it. Tyler had once dreamed of flying in first class, not as a passenger, but as the one who controlled order in that world. He liked the feeling of being called sir. He liked the soft power of a polite smile. He liked watching other people obediently follow instructions. And today that power was facing its first real test. A black woman in the wrong seat. At least that was what Linda Crawford had led him to believe. Linda was dabbing at her tears with a tissue, her voice choked like a victim in a bad play. "I just want a peaceful flight, Tyler. But she is looking at me with a very threatening expression." Greg folded his arms and added, "If the airline does not act immediately, I will file a complaint directly with the CEO." That sentence was the spark. Tyler could feel his neck growing hot. They had just mentioned the CEO, the highest danger level in his chain of fears. He turned to Maya, his voice trying to sound calm, but weighed down with authority. "Ma'am, in order to avoid disrupting the flight, the airline is prepared to offer you a seat in premium economy with full amenities. We will also add a voucher worth $400 for this inconvenience." It sounded like a civilized offer, but his tone was a command, wrapped in sugar. Maya tilted her head slightly. Light caught her cheekbone and made her features tighten for a moment, not from anger, but from a deep disappointment. She drew a breath, her voice still calm, yet every word dropping like lead. "Mr. Barnes, I do not need a voucher. I do not need free drinks. I only need to sit in the seat I paid for." Tyler frowned slightly. He was not used to passengers who said no. He looked around and saw eyes fixed on them, a few people recording on their phones, others simply watching as if it were a play. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "the airline only wants to resolve this quickly, so the flight is not delayed. You are creating unnecessary tension." Those words, unnecessary tension, landed like a silent verdict. In that moment, Maya understood that he no longer saw her as a passenger, but as a problem. She answered, her voice still soft, but perfectly clear. "The tension did not start with me, Mr. Barnes. It started with the person you chose to believe." Color rose briefly in Tyler's face. Linda jumped in at once, like someone pouring gasoline on a flame. "He does not need to argue with you, Tyler. Call security. She is clearly being defiant." "Defiant," Maya repeated, raising an eyebrow, her voice low. "I am sitting quietly in my own seat. If that is defiance, then perhaps the airline's definition of a cooperative passenger needs to be reviewed." The air seemed to explode in silence. Tyler turned away and pressed the button on his radio, his voice cracking with tension. "Barnes in first class. I have a non-compliant passenger. I may need assistance." A curt "Roger" that crackled back through the speaker. Linda leaned back, satisfied, adjusting her necklace. Greg folded his newspaper and murmured to his wife, "You see, just let them handle it. It is nothing." But in the row behind a young Indian passenger watched the scene with visible unease. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. No one wanted to step in, not when the person being treated badly did not share the majority's skin color. Tyler turned back. His eyes now carried a look of seriousness, the kind of seriousness worn by someone convinced he was protecting order. "Miss Cole, I am asking you to cooperate. You are making other passengers feel unsafe. Maya narrowed her eyes. I have not done anything. Ma'am, they say you raised your voice. Did you hear me raise my voice? Her question cut through his excuses like a blade. Tyler did not answer. She looked straight at him, her voice dropping to a chill that made people shiver. You are watching a white woman pretend to be afraid, and you choose to believe her? No evidence, no reason, only because you think I look like someone who might cause trouble. Tyler tried to smile. You are misunderstanding. No, Maya cut him off. I am stating the truth. And you are the one who is afraid of that truth. The first-class cabin fell utterly silent. Outside, the engines throbbed like the heartbeat of a giant beast. Linda slapped her hand on the table. Tyler, call security right now. I cannot take this anymore. She is threatening me. No one is threatening you. Mrs. Crawford, Maya replied, without even turning. Linda lifted her hand, high like an actress on stage. Do you see Tyler? She is being aggressive toward me. Tyler exhaled hard. Truth and performance were fighting inside his head. In the end, he chose the easy path, the same path so many before him had taken to trust the tears of privilege over the calm of reason. He picked up the radio and spoke with finality, requesting immediate security support at Gate 22. One non-compliant passenger showing signs of disruptive behavior. His voice rang out like a sentence passed. Maya closed her eyes, not out of fear, but because it was almost absurd. $4 billion rested in her hands, and these people had no idea that with a single line of text she could take it all away. She sighed and said quietly, You have just lost something far bigger than a first-class seat, Mr. Barnes. Tyler frowned. I am following procedure. No, Maya opened her eyes, her gaze cutting through him, her voice like shattered steel. You are following your fear. A single second of stillness passed. Then the sound of heavy shoes rang out in the corridor. Two figures appeared at the cabin door. Officer Hank Doyle and Evan Reyes. They wore grey security jackets and bright silver belts, their faces expressionless. What is going on here? Doyle asked, his voice low and blunt. Tyler hurried forward and pointed toward Maya. She is refusing to cooperate, refusing to leave her seat, causing trouble for other passengers. Linda rushed in. That is right. I tried to be polite, but she scared me. I am truly afraid for my safety. Evan looked over at Maya, the woman sitting calmly with her hands on her thighs, her gaze steady. He asked, doubt in his voice. Doyle nodded. On an aircraft, the crew's word is law. Tyler stepped back, giving the officers room. Maya looked up, her voice so calm it was frightening. I am not leaving my seat. I have a valid ticket. I am not causing any disturbance. If you wish, call your supervisors and verify. Doyle answered without expression. We can do that in the terminal. Right now, I need you to stand up. Maya looked around. Not a single passenger spoke. Not one person said, Do not do this. They just turned away or lowered their eyes to their phones, as if silence could absolve them of responsibility. She rose, picked up her bag, and spoke in a low voice that carried through the entire cabin. You have just proved one thing. Here the truth does not matter. All it takes is someone loud enough to be believed. Linda turned her face away. Tyler avoided her eyes. Doyle nodded and gestured. Let us go, ma'am. As Maya stepped out of first class, the cold white light of the jet bridge washed over her. She felt as if she were leaving the world of human beings, a world where reason had been defeated by privilege, and the silence of witnesses had become complicity. Behind her, Tyler took a deep breath, straightened his collar, and tried to look composed. He had no idea that in only a few hours his name would appear on every news site, not because he had maintained order on a flight, but because he had become the symbol of systemic blindness, the man who burned down an airline with a single call, made in the name of procedure. And Maya, as she walked down the jet bridge, left behind only one sentence light, as a breeze, yet destined to haunt Tyler for the rest of his life. You have just traded away an entire empire only to protect the comfort of someone who was wrong. The first sound was not footsteps, it was the collective sigh of the first-class cabin. A strange silence spread out, as if everyone suddenly realized the line between a small inconvenience and a disaster had just been crossed. The sharp rhythm of hard shoes rang on the floor of the jet bridge as two men appeared, grey jackets, silver security badges, swaying under the lights, Officer Hank Doyle and Evan Reyes. The whole cabin turned to look at them like an audience waiting for a good show. But for Maya Cole, this was no performance. This was a living indictment written by prejudice and signed with cowardice. Hank Doyle was the one who walked in front. He was close to 50, salt and pepper hair, the weathered face of a man who had spent his life believing he was just following procedure. Evan, his younger colleague, still carried the hesitant look of someone new to the job. "What is going on here?" Doyle asked, his voice dry and hard. Tyler Barnes hurried forward, his voice shaky but straining for professionalism. "This passenger is refusing to follow crew instructions, refusing to move, and creating tension for other passengers." The words "this passenger" landed like an invisible knife, cutting Maya's name away in one stroke. No more Dr. Cole. No more CEO. Just this passenger. An empty label, sharp enough to strip away the dignity of the person behind it. Linda Crawford seized the moment, pushing the script higher. "Thank God you are here," she cried. "I have never seen anyone so aggressive. She is scaring me." Her voice was just loud enough for the rouse behind to hear. A young man pulled out his phone. A soft click sounded. The camera began recording. Maya did not look at Linda, and she did not look at Tyler. She stared straight at the two officers in front of her, her voice so calm, it was unsettling. "You want me to leave the plane? Before I do that, I want to know the official reason." Doyle shrugged and answered flatly. "The crew has full authority to decide. If they ask a passenger to leave, we are required to enforce it." "Even when that request is wrong?" Maya asked. "We follow procedure," Doyle replied without a flicker of emotion. "We do not argue about right or wrong. We make sure everyone is safe." Maya pressed her lips together and felt her heartbeat slow. Safe, such a beautiful word, and so cruel when it is used as a weapon. She understood this was no longer about a seat. This was a small portrait of an entire system where those in power chose the kind of safe that meant staying silent in the face of injustice. Linda started crying again. Greg lightly placed a hand on her shoulder, playing the comforting husband. Tyler folded his hands behind his back, his eyes saying clearly, "I did the right thing." And the others? They lowered their heads, pretended to read, pretended to sleep. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to be dragged into trouble. And in that moment, Maya Cole, who had once believed that knowledge and reason could defeat any prejudice, realized that silence was also a form of cruelty. She said quietly, "I will not leave. I have a valid ticket. I am not causing any disturbance. I am simply sitting in my seat." Doyle tilted his head, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, you have two choices. One, you walk off voluntarily. 2, you are escorted off. Either way, you are getting off this plane." The entire cabin held its breath. Maya looked around, her gaze, not accusing, but searching for a trace of conscience. Everyone looked away. The world of civilized people was curling up inside the shell of it is none of my business. Phones began to rise. Lenses turned toward Maya and the officers standing in front of her. Some passengers filmed in secret, others openly. They had no idea they were capturing a moment that would shake the aviation industry. To them it was just a dramatic clip to share online. Maya rose slowly. It was not surrender, it was a controlled decision. She understood that if she resisted, the video would become proof of a black passenger being unruly. If she stayed calm, it would become evidence of raw injustice. She opened the overhead bin and took down her worn leather bag. As she pulled the zipper, her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a cold, rising anger. She turned back, looking straight at Tyler, her eyes flashing like a blade under the cabin lights. "You have just created a dangerous precedent. An airline cannot survive if its staff cannot tell the difference between authority and prejudice." Tyler pressed his lips together and said nothing. She looked around the cabin, her voice ringing clear, each word carved into the air. "This is a failure not only of service, but of humanity." Doyle signaled for her to walk ahead. Evan followed behind, head lowered, avoiding her gaze. The aisle was utterly still. Only the sound of her bag's wheels rolling on the floor remained, the metallic rumble echoing like chains dragged through the air. Maya walked with her back straight. Each step landed heavy but proud, as if she were stamping the truth into the carpet. She knew this was not a walk of shame. It was a walk of clarity, the walk of someone who had just seen the true nature of a rotting system. As she passed the first row, a middle-aged woman whispered softly, "I am sorry." Maya turned slightly and nodded. "Do not apologize to me. Say that when you see someone else treated the way I was." The woman lowered her head, tears falling. Maya stepped through the cabin door. A cold gust from the jet bridge hit her face. Harsh white light poured over her, bright and empty. Behind her, someone started clapping. 1, then 2, then a few more. The sound spread applause for the release, for the feeling that the problem had been removed. To them, Maya Cole was nothing more than a nuisance cleared out of their luxurious space. But in her mind, one thought echoed clearer than ever. They have just removed their own savior. As she stepped out onto the jet bridge, Maya glanced through a small window. The aircraft gleamed in the fading afternoon light. She could see the words, Horizon Atlantic painted, bold on the metal skin, shiny proud, and about to become a monument to ignorance. The 2 officers walked ahead without looking back. They led her to the gate counter where Mark Ellis was on duty. Mark saw them, froze for a second, then asked quietly. Another incident. Doyle handed over a form. Passenger removed from flight for failure to comply with crew instructions. "Got it," Mark replied, his voice hollow. "I will take it from here." As the 2 officers walked away, Maya watched their grey silhouettes fade into the harsh white of the concourse. None of the 3 men knew they had just ended a $4 billion deal the entire company was waiting for on the other side of the Atlantic. Mark tapped on his keyboard and said in a flat tone, "We will cancel your ticket. You can contact customer service." Maya said nothing. Then, in that suffocating stillness, she spoke slowly. "Mr. Ellis, what happened today is not just a system error. It is the failure of an entire culture, one where people choose to trust privilege over truth." Mark avoided her eyes. "I am just doing my job." And that, Maya replied softly, is exactly the problem. Then she walked away. She found a quiet corner by the large windows. Outside Flight 227 still sat at the gate, preparing to push back. She took out her phone, the screen lighting up with dozens of messages. Daniel Brooks. Thomas Keaton. The Horizon Atlantic Public Relations team, all of them waiting for her to land so they could start the signing ceremony. She drew in a long breath. The sting of humiliation in her chest cooled, replaced by something else, cold, sharp, and clear as steel. If they wanted to treat her as a problem, then she would become the problem they would never forget. She pressed the first number in her contacts. Daniel's voice came through. "Maya, where are you? How is the flight?" Maya stared out through the glass at the aircraft beginning to roll away from the gate and said slowly, "They pulled me out of first class." Daniel, and now it is my turn to pull them out of the market. That afternoon, Los Angeles Airport burned bright like a half-finished dream gone up in flames. At Gate 22, where streams of people still hurried past, Maya Cole sat alone in silence. In the glass in front of her, her reflection overlapped with the image of a Boeing 787 Horizon Atlantic Flight 227 slowly rolling out toward the runway. In the palm of her hand, her phone vibrated non-stop. Dozens of messages, emails, the press schedule in London, and countless early congratulations that now sounded like mockery. Maya did not open a single one. Instead, she stared straight at that aircraft, the place where, just minutes ago, they had pushed her out of her own seat and applauded while she was humiliated. It seemed like a small moment, but in her mind, it spread like an oil stain. She no longer saw just an airplane. She saw an entire system, a chain of links held together by arrogance, fear, and indifference. Her phone buzzed again. The name on the screen, Daniel Brooks. She swiped to answer. His voice came through warm and rushed. "Maya, where are you? I just saw that HA 227 has departed. Do not tell me you missed the flight." Maya's lips curled into something between a smile and a bitter line. "I didn't miss the flight, Daniel. They removed me from it." On the other end, there was a beat of silence. "Removed you? Why, because I was sitting in my own seat," Maya said, her voice steady, cold, and tired. "Because a white woman decided I did not belong there. Because a flight attendant believed her. Because a security officer believed the flight attendant. And because an entire airline chose to believe prejudice instead of truth." Daniel drew in a long breath. He had known Maya for more than 10 years, but he had never heard her speak with a flatness this frightening. He asked quietly, "Are you hurt, no?" Maya replied, "I am just awake." She stood and walked to a row of empty seats facing the runway. The evening light washed the sky in orange and red, reflecting off the fuselage where the words Horizon Atlantic glowed like a cruel joke. "Daniel," she said slowly, "do you remember when I told you I never invest in a place where the culture is rotten?" "I remember," he answered, a hint of worry in his tone. "This," she said, "is the perfect example." "Wait, Maya," he cut in, "are you talking about—" "Yes." Her voice shifted, turning cold, resolute, sharp as a surgeon's blade. "Kill it." Daniel went quiet, as if his ears had betrayed him. "What did you say? Cancel the entire deal, stop all transfers, pull the credit line, end the partnership." "Maya," he burst out, "do you realize what that means? They are waiting for the press conference in London. The entire market is expecting this news. A withdrawal like that will push them into bankruptcy," she finished. "I know." Daniel's voice grew urgent. "But we already signed the preliminary agreement. If we pull out now, The market will see us as unstable. The shareholders will question us. The media will. The media will have their story, Maya said, turning her back on the window. And I have mine. My story begins in seat 2A. She sat down and opened her laptop. The glow of the screen lit her calm face. Daniel, she said, I want you to send a termination notice immediately to Horizon's chief financial officer. Cite irreconcilable failure in corporate culture and operational integrity. You know I am not speaking lightly. I want the language clear, hard, and expensive. Daniel's fingers flew across the keyboard so fast the laptop nearly shook. And the press, he asked. Leak it, she replied. Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Reuters. Nothing official. An anonymous source confirms that Coal Dynamics pulled out of the deal due to cultural issues. Maya, this will trigger a chain reaction. Their stock price will collapse, she interrupted. And they deserve it. She did not raise her voice, but every word sounded like an order etched into steel. On the other end, Daniel sighed. He knew there was no persuading her once her eyes took on that icy look. He only asked softly, Are you absolutely sure? More sure than I have ever been, Maya answered. I offered them a chance to be saved. They chose to throw it away. Now they will learn a different lesson that respect is not a courtesy. It is a currency. She checked her watch. It was 5:32 in the afternoon. By now, Flight 227 was in mid-air, carrying the people who had thrown her out of her own seat and carrying their own future as it quietly melted. Daniel was silent for a few seconds, then said, Understood. I will trigger the withdrawal process. But Maya, a move like this could wipe out their company. Tens of thousands of people will lose their jobs. Maya looked down at her hands, the same hands that had signed hundreds of agreements to pull others back from the brink of bankruptcy. You think I do not know that she asked? I know. But I also know that if I let this slide, the message I send is simple: keep doing it. No one will ever dare push back. She lifted her head, her voice solid as stone. Not everyone deserves to sit in seats of power. If they hold people in contempt, they do not deserve to be saved. She opened the internal finance app. On the screen, a line of text glowed. Transfer pending $500 million, Phase 1 funding to Horizon Atlantic. Maya rested her hands on the keyboard. The cursor blinked. She typed a single sentence, cancel transaction. One click. The notification changed. Transaction terminated. In that instant, a part of the global financial world shuddered, and no one in Horizon's operations room in London had any idea that the cause began in a first-class cabin and a single, contemptuous look. Daniel finished sending the termination email and asked, It is done. I attached your electronic signature. Do you want me to forward it to the legal team? Yes, Maya replied. And after that, I want you to send an internal note to our shareholders. No justification, just one line. Coal Dynamics does not partner with organizations that fail at the most basic act of respect. Daniel paused, lowering his voice. They will never forget today. Exactly, Maya said, her eyes drifting back toward the horizon, where the Boeing was disappearing from view. Sometimes justice does not need a courtroom. It only needs someone with enough power to say enough. In that moment, the sun slipped completely behind the distant mountains. The last strip of gold touched her eyes, then vanished. Maya turned off her phone and closed her laptop. She stood quietly, leaving the empty seating area and walking slowly toward another gate. No one around her knew that in the next 30 minutes, the global financial system would receive the news. Coal Dynamics cancels a $4 billion deal with Horizon Atlantic Airlines reason corporate culture issues. Their stock would go into free fall, shareholders would panic, the executive board would rush into an emergency meeting. Everyone would ask the same question. What happened? And none of them, from CEO Thomas Keaton down to Tyler Barnes, would realize that the answer lay hidden in 3 words, engraved on that first-class seat: "2A, no respect." Before leaving the airport, Maya turned back for one last look. The aircraft had vanished into the dusk, only its blinking lights visible in the distance. She whispered, not for Daniel, not for the press, but for herself. "They took my seat. I will take everything else." Then she turned away, a small figure in a sea of people, yet with every step she took, the ground seemed to tremble. A storm of finance ethics and public opinion was beginning, and at its center stood a woman who had once been told to leave seat 2A. The London headquarters of Horizon Atlantic Airlines shone that morning like a royal stage. Spotlights bathed the silver plaque bearing the airline's new logo, the symbol CEO Thomas Keaton had declared would mark a new era of rebirth. In the grand conference hall, champagne was already poured, reporters were in position, and the entire executive board was celebrating the future they believed had been saved by a $4 billion deal. On the stage, Thomas Keaton lifted a crystal glass, his smile as bright as the camera flashes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, with easy confidence, "today is the day Horizon Atlantic turns the page. With our partnership with Coal Dynamics, we will not only fly farther, we will fly on the technology of the future." The room erupted in applause. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed. Someone from the communications team whispered, "Crazy to think that just a few months ago, we were on the brink of bankruptcy." Another replied, "Not anymore. With $4 billion being pumped in, nothing can stop Horizon from taking off again." But on the 22nd floor, in a small office of the finance department, an alarm chime had just sounded. Olivia Park, the airline's chief financial officer, frowned at her computer screen. She was not someone who panicked easily, but the message in front of her made her blood run cold. Transfer cancelled, $500 million, initial funding terminated. She blinked, thinking she had misread it, then refreshed the page. It stayed the same. She checked her internal emails. A new message had appeared from the legal address of Coal Dynamics. The subject line contained only a few words: "Termination of partnership. Immediate effect." Olivia read every line, each word, cutting into her eyes like a blade. Coal Dynamics hereby terminates the strategic partnership agreement with Horizon Atlantic Airlines, citing irreconcilable failure in corporate culture and operational integrity, effective immediately. Her hand shook. She grabbed her phone and called Thomas directly. "Thomas, we have a problem." "What problem?" "Do not tell me they sent the money early. I have not yet." "No." Olivia cut him off. "They cancelled. Everything. Effective immediately." There was a heavy pause on the other end. "Cancelled," Thomas repeated, as if the word did not belong in his language. "Yes. They are citing failure of corporate culture." "Thomas, this is not a technical glitch. This is intentional." A champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The whole room turned to look at him, his face draining of color. "What is wrong, Thomas?" a board member asked. He did not answer. He opened his phone and read the email Olivia had forwarded. Each line tore through his mind like a storm. He looked around, forcing a smile. "It is probably just a small misunderstanding. They must have sent the wrong letter. I will call and confirm." He stepped out of the room in a hurry and shut the door behind him. The click of the lock sounded ice cold. In the marble hallway outside, Thomas's fingers trembled as he dialed Maya Cole's number. The call did not even ring. The line showed busy. He called Daniel Brooks, the chief financial officer of Cole Dynamics, and got nothing. A cold sensation crawled down his spine. He returned to the office, where Olivia stood, her face pale. "No one is picking up," he said quietly. "Send the email again. Ask for formal confirmation. We cannot just be cancelled like this." Olivia shook her head, her lips dry. "Thomas, the news is already on Bloomberg." On the big television mounted in the conference hall, Bloomberg had switched to a breaking news banner. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Cole Dynamics withdraws $4 billion deal with Horizon Atlantic Sources, cite corporate culture failure." The room plunged into chaos. Someone threw a glass. Someone cursed. Someone grabbed their phone to call the lawyers. A public relations director shot to her feet. "We need a media response now." Press release. "We say this is all a misunderstanding," another voice shouted back. A misunderstanding of what the stock has already been halted. They all turned toward Thomas, who now stood frozen like a statue in the middle of the disaster he himself had helped create. In Thomas's mind, thousands of questions crashed into one another. Why what happened? Who did what wrong? Then a thought flashed Maya Cole. He remembered clearly that morning she had flown out of Los Angeles. "She is on the plane," he blurted. "She is on her way here. This is just a systems issue." Olivia glanced down at the report that had just come in from the JFK operations desk. "No, Thomas. She is not on that flight. Not on it, the report says, passenger Maya Cole removed from flight prior to departure." The air seemed to be sucked from the room. Thomas stood there stunned. "Removed?" Why, Olivia shook her head, her voice unsteady. "It does not say. Only a short note deplaned at crew's request due to non-compliance. The truth dropped like a stone smashing through a still lake." Thomas staggered backward and leaned against the table, whispering, No, this cannot just be a coincidence." Another executive asked Cole, "Is she the one they dragged off the plane?" No one answered, but every pair of eyes turned toward Thomas, then toward the television, where the phrase "corporate culture failure" continued to scroll over and over. 1 second, 2 seconds, then another glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered. And in that moment, they all understood. They had shot themselves in the head. Thomas spun around, his voice, now hoarse. "I want every report on my desk right now. Names of the crew, the passengers, involved security staff, everything." He slammed his hand on the table. "Find out who it was that removed our savior from that flight." It took them less than 30 minutes to pull the chain of reports from the JFK system. The names appeared clearly. Flight attendant Tyler Barnes. Passengers involved: Linda Crawford, Greg Crawford. Security officers: Hank Doyle, Evan Reyes. Thomas stared at the list, his face shifting from ghost white to a furious red, the color of rage laced with despair. He roared. "Because of one stupid flight attendant, we just lost $4 billion and the entire future of this company." Outside, the stock ticker screens were lighting up blood red. Horizon Atlantic's symbol, HRA, dropped 30% in just 10 minutes. The market exploded. Media outlets pushed alerts all at once. Headlines sliced through the air like knives. Horizon's $4 billion lifeline vanishes. Sources claim CEO of partner company was mistakenly removed from flight. Corporate culture, failure costs. Airline, its future. Thomas collapsed into his chair. He had chased power his entire life, and now it had fallen apart because of one bad decision at Seat 2A. Olivia stepped forward and placed a printed page from social media in front of him. A video clip had gone viral at incredible speed, showing security escorting Maya Cole out of the first-class cabin. The view count was in the millions. The comments rolled in like a tidal wave. Is this really the CEO of Cole Dynamics? She was thrown off a plane belonging to the airline she was about to save. If this is Horizon's culture, they deserve to fall. Thomas stared at the screen, feeling his insides clench. The noise in the room began to die down, replaced by a heavy, wordless fear. A public relations executive whispered, "People are already calling her the woman who grounded a company." Thomas looked up. His face was hollow, as if he had aged 10 years in a single hour. He spoke quietly, barely above a breath. "Prepare for an emergency board meeting, and find me her phone number." Olivia looked at him, her voice breaking. "Sir, I think it is already too late." Thomas turned to the window. The London sky had turned a dull grey rain beginning to fall. Drops streamed down the Horizon Atlantic logo on the building outside, sliding downward like blood. A storm had begun, and he was the one who had pulled the lever. The phone rang in Maya's hand as she sat in the first-class lounge of another airline. On the screen appeared the name Thomas Keaton Horizon Atlantic. She let it ring twice before answering. Dr. Cole, his voice trembled a mix of desperation and flattery. "I just learned about the terrible incident on that flight. I cannot believe that happened to you. I want you to know that Horizon does not tolerate behavior like that. I have already fired them immediately." Maya said nothing. The only sound was the soft clink of ice against the glass in her hand. "This is not the fault of a few employees, Mr. Keaton," she said slowly. "It is the reflex of a system, a culture that allows people like me to have to prove we deserve respect." "But Dr. Cole, if you cancel this deal, 50,000 people will lose their jobs. Do you understand how many lives depend on you?" "Yes," Maya replied, her voice quiet, but sharp as a blade. "And that is exactly why it is even more shameful. Because they are losing their jobs not because of me, but because you allowed arrogance and blindness to guide your entire airline." On the other end, Thomas's voice cracked. "Please, I am begging you, reconsider." Maya cut him off, her tone soft but final. "This deal is dead, Thomas. Not because of money, but because of trust." She ended the call. 2 hours later, the New York Stock Exchange shook. Horizon Atlantic's shares plunged 72% in 10 minutes, wiping out more than $3 billion in market value. The media called it the Cole effect. The whole world watched as a giant airline crumbled under a moral lesson that could not be priced. Respect is not a privilege, it is a foundation. In his London home, Thomas Keaton looked out the window at the crowd gathering outside, employees, shareholders, and reporters. He bowed his head and whispered, "All we needed was an apology, a little sooner." But it was too late, because no empire ever falls from lack of money, only from losing its soul. 1 month later, in the sunlit conference room of Cole Dynamics, Maya Cole signed a new partnership agreement with Summit Sky Airlines, a small carrier built on a culture that valued respect at every level. CEO Claire Reynolds shook her hand, her eyes bright with conviction. "We will rebuild the aviation industry," she said, "but this time we start with people." Maya smiled. There was no anger left, only clarity. She had not saved Horizon, but she had saved a future that deserved to exist. The story of the woman who was removed from Seat 2A had now become legend, a testament that in this world dignity still holds its worth, and that sometimes justice does not arrive through gunfire or verdicts, but through a silent decision powerful enough to shake the entire sky. From the perspective of a leadership ethics expert, the story of Maya Cole is not just about a $4 billion collapse. It is a wake-up call for every organization. Culture does not live in handbooks. It lives in how we treat the most vulnerable among us. A company can lose money and reputation, but when it loses respect, it loses its soul. And sometimes justice does not need to be loud, it only needs one person brave enough to say enough. If you believe that dignity is something beyond price hit, like to share that message and subscribe, so you will not miss the stories where ethics and power collide. Leave a single phrase in the comments below as your personal vow to the world: keep respect.